Thank you. Thank you for being here. Pleasure to be here. So, the session, as you just heard, is called All Things Branding. And that's essentially what we are going to focus on. And I actually want to begin by talking about the title of the session itself, All Things Branding. And my first question, therefore, is to you. Actually, it isn't all things branding, or at least historically. When we think about brands, if you were to wake me up in the middle of the night and ask me which brands, I'd probably name a soap brand or a shampoo brand. And in that sense, it's interesting that Tanishq, right, chose to brand something that had actually never been branded before, right? Tanishq went to jewelry, which mostly existed in the form of local brands, which were well known, say, in a city or in a region, right? And chose to go that way. So I am just wondering, right? What was the motivation there? Why go into uncharted territory? The challenge of it, the opportunity of it, something else?
Yeah, it was not really a motivation. I think it was just a big idea that our managing director, founder at that time, Mr. Desai, imagined the possibilities of something like that. We are all aware of Tiffany. Tiffany is one of the world's most prestigious brands. It's a jewelry brand. It was there very much when Tanishq was not even there. And therefore, as an inspiration, it was very much there in his imagination. And he said, if it is possible globally, it is possible in India, even though it appears to be not so possible. And so it was just a leap of faith, a man's vision about what is possible.
So unlike, say, the McDonald's experiment, McDonald's thought they could bring their burgers here, but they realized that India is a very different market and they had to kind of adapt to the local market. Tanishq was an idea that he took from Tiffany and very successfully adapted to the local market.
No, the big difference is that the food is Western food,
right,
whereas our jewelry is Indian jewelry. So it's
okay. So it's really in that sense, right? Now, my next question, therefore, is to you. Of course, liquor is branded, and there are lots of well-known liquor brands. But an Indian liquor brand selling in the UK, that was a really, what can I say, a really big idea that's come together very, very well. What is that story, background like?
Okay, so this, I think, at the macro level and the micro level, right? At the macro level, look at the India story itself, right? The last 20 years, a whole bunch of coverage is about India and the growth and how the middle class is rising. And so is the consumption. The interesting thing is, Amrit sort of mirrors that journey. Today, you see hundreds of craft alcoholic brands. You look at gin, you look at 100,000, tens of brands that are there, right? Why is that happen? Because when they started, there weren't enough people to buy premium alcohol brands, right? It was 2009 when they attempted to launch it. So it actually helped that they tried to launch it in the UK first to get the approval of that, but that required a lot of guts. This was a family-run firm, right? This is a third-generation family-run firm. They don't have PE money, they're not a public company where they have a lot of money. They had to just really take that bold step and say, no, we will distill good quality whiskey and we will learn how to make it, because we didn't know how to make good quality whiskey. Most of the whiskey that is available in the market is actually distilled out of molasses, right? From a Western nomenclature, it's actually rum, right? So the whole notion that we will actually learn everything and we will launch it there is as good as a startup. It's actually a paradox that it's a family-run firm, but that it worked on a lot of the startup principles that you're so used to associating with a Swiggy or a Flipkart, right? So in that sense, they took a big gamble, but I think that did pay off because India caught up. Today, more than the export or as much as their export, the local consumption also is gone up, right? Which is actually very interesting in that sense.
Right. So it's interesting that you talk about how, in some sense, Amrit has kind of grown with India as well as Tanishq. So essentially, both these brands, if I may put it this way, have created the market which has attracted a whole bunch of Me Too guys, so to speak. Would it be right to say that?
No, there's one big difference. I think there was a very large market for Indian jewelry.
But not branded.
No, not branded, but there was a very large market for Indian jewelry, and Tanishq was sort of branded it. Okay. There was not a very large market for Indian single malt. There was a large market for Indian whiskey, yes. But so in a way, the creation of a brand there and the creation of a category brand here, something like that.
I'm assuming perhaps not everyone is familiar with the difference between single malt and whiskey per se. So can I request you to spend a minute perhaps talking about that?
Okay, so this is the most dreadful part of my session where I actually try to convince you all that chemistry is actually cool. So whiskey, as far as it goes, the single malt comes down to 3 ingredients, right? All the magic, all the brand, all the variation, it's largely 3. Well, 4 if there are guys who are going to catch me, but 3 primarily: barley, yeast and water, okay? You can throw in peat, which gives you that smoky barbecue sort of a burnt thing, but that's not always the case. So 3 things, right? So those are the 3 things that go in, and then what do you do? How does alcohol happen, right? So again, I'll step back. You drank beer, you drank gin, but if you look at how whiskey is made, so you put barley, you ferment it. A lot of the Indian alcohol culture, pre-British, is actually fermented, right? So you just put in yeast eats up that sugar, and it spits out alcohol, right? And if you leave it there, the concentration is about 8 to 10%. Now, to take that up, you need to do what is distillation, right? So you exploit the boiling point difference between alcohol, which is 78 degrees, and water, 100 degrees. So you heat that mixture up at about 78, and alcohol escapes. That is, at that level, it goes up to about 25 to 30%. It's like vodka. It's very clear. It's actually not the whiskey you look at. The coloration comes when you put it in a barrel. Okay, all of that color, that tawny golden color, comes from aging in barrels. So that's the process of what a single malt is. And one other thing is that typically a single malt is something that is made out of the same distillery and typically the same batch. If I blended it, like the Johnny Walkers, they're blended. I take 2 different whiskeys and I blend it together, and that becomes Johnny Walker. So there's blended whiskey and there's single malt whiskey. There's more based on the grain you choose, but I think the chemistry is good enough. I can already see. I think
Show of hands for how many people still think chemistry is not cool. I didn't understand too much of that. I'm hoping you did, but I thought it must be a question that had to be asked. Now coming back to you, sir. Now, so Tanishq now chooses to go into uncharted territory, right? Can you give us a sense of what the initial years were like when they were competing with all of these jewelers? They were trying to convince the customer who had not really encountered this kind of branded jewelry before, that what they were doing deserved a closer look.
Yeah, so Tanishq was actually a little bit of an accident, I would say, because the company had invested in a factory to export jewelry for earning foreign exchange. Right. That didn't work out, and therefore there was a big investment that needed to be done something about, and therefore why not in India kind of idea came up. It was launched, but since the whole manufacturing thrust was towards Europeans and Americans, all that jewelry was diamond jewelry. It was very Western in style, and Mr. Desai wanted the Tiffany of the East to be set up here, Tanishq to be that. So everything was wrong in the first few years. The products were wrong, the marketing was wrong, the stores were like a 5-star hotel into which very few people came. So it struggled for many years before it turned around.
Okay. And the Tatas were willing to go that extra mile to let this brand, take off.
Very much.
I think that was a very important thing,
Yeah.
They were not looking to, what can I say?
In a hurry to close.
In a hurry to see it realize profit in 2 years, 3 years. They were willing to give that time. My question is to both of you. The importance of the name, in this case Amrit, in your case Tanishq. Would you perhaps expand on how they came upon that name, and that's an important part of the brand.
The interesting thing about Amrit is that it's the whiskey, while the single malt journey is only about 2 decades old, the company is 75 years old, right? So India gets independence and Jagdales apply for a liquor license and they get it. That's pretty much 1948. And they start way in the low rung, right? So the notion that Amrit is only single malt is wrong. Only about 10-15% of their actual revenue comes from single malt, right? It punches way above its weight in terms of the glamour, but most of the revenue actually comes from the rest of it, right? So I don't specifically know why they named it, because this was named by the first generation and the third generation's here. And when I wrote the book, the second generation also was not around. So I had to sort of get it. But what I did get, what I can sort of extrapolate and sort of guess, my best guess is they embrace this Indian thing, right? This is the question. How many brands from India can you take to the world and say it's proudly Indian? We are very good at generic stuff, cotton, all of that we've had. I know it's changing now, but Amrit is up there in terms, you can take that bottle of whiskey. I've heard stories about ambassadors in different countries. I've heard flight schedules being changed because they couldn't pick up a bottle of Amrit because of the nightmare Byzantine excise laws that we've had, right? So I felt the best answer I can give you is that they really embrace that Indian thing, and that comes through in their branding. Going one last point, right? I mean, how many people will think of using Sangam literature to brand whiskey, right? So the joke is that Mr. Chokalingam, who's the head distiller, he used to struggle. He's from Mayavaram, it's a town in Tamil Nadu, and he struggled to say Loch Lomond or the fancy Scottish names. He's like, I'm going to make them say my Tamil names now. Let's see how they do it. So his whiskies are named Naidil, Kurunji, Mullai. So he sort of, so you embrace that identity, right? Because name alone will not cut it. You need to embrace that entire universe in that sense and tell that story compellingly. That's what I would say.
That's interesting.
I think Mr. Desai must have started with a notion of the name in his mind, something really exotic, something very feminine, and a lot of search, a lot of evaluation. And a colleague of mine who used to work with him in that team, she, pored over multiple books, and she had circled many names. And one of them was Nishka, Nishka.
And it meant? Any idea? What did it mean?
It meant a throat ornament, like a necklace, I think in Persian, if I remember right. So he liked it, and but he cut Nishka, K-A, and put a Q there, and made it Nishk, because, Ishq, all that kind of exoticism was a criterion. And then he added T-A ahead of that. T-A was Tata, T-A was Tamil Nadu, because we are a Tamil Nadu government-owned company. Majority partner is the Tamil Nadu government, and Tata's own a little less. So Tamil Nadu, Tata, Ta, Nishk, Tanishk.
Wow, what an interesting story. Right. The next question specifically has to do with this fact that both these brands were created about 15, 20 years ago, maybe a little more, right? Before the age of social media, right? And so you had to follow a certain branding, advertising strategy, perhaps which it will be very different from what you would probably do today. So how was branding, advertising before the age of social media? How did it look like? A peek into that? Okay.
So Amrit launches in 2009, and they launch it in Scotland, Edinburgh, in a restaurant. Apart from the tech, right? Obviously, there is tech which sort of encompasses everything. You also have to contend with what works in the industry. For instance, they had just launched 2 expressions, right? And the distributors they spoke to in the UK, they said you need at least 4 to someone to take you seriously. Now that is intelligence based on that category, which builds up for whatever reason, right? A whole bunch of people doing that. So firstly, they had to crack it, like he said, without tech. And anyway, even if you had tech, not like you can advertise. In India, at least you can't, right? So it's like your arms are tied anyway because of the category. So one of the things that they did, right, it actually starts, the whole idea of the single malt starts from Rakshit Jagdale, who's a 3rd generation. His PhD thesis actually becomes what they want to implement. He's doing an MBA in Newcastle, and his dad's like, why don't you attempt this, man? We're anyway wanting to do it in the business. So he does that. And this is where the theory and the praxis differ, right? What do you do when you write a thesis? You just look for hundreds of references, you look for what has worked, and guess what had worked? 2 iconic beer brands, lager brands, Cobra and Kingfisher, right? The strategy was that you pair good lager with spicy food. In the curry houses that UK has a lot of things, but food, no. Right? They had to rip off our
good food, no.
Good food, no. So all the spices, so they've sort of co-opted our food, just like how we've co-opted a lot of their things. So working that lager with that food really worked. Mr. Billamoria became a billionaire. He sold that. He's in the House of Lords. Similarly with Kingfisher. So they thought, why don't we do that? And then they realized that drinking whiskey is harsh. You can't have that with Vindaloo. So you know, it was a lot of faltering to figure out. Then that's when they realized that you can't sell it to the restaurants. So then what did they do? There was obvious bias towards Indian stuff. Hell, we didn't trust it. The Desis were the first critics over there. The Indian origin guys in the UK are like, no way we can make good whiskey because there was no precedent. So what they did was blind tasting, a classic Pepsi versus Coke, right? Pepsi did this in the I think 70s when the cola wars were happening. So what did Coke was ruling the roost. So Pepsi is like, hey, okay, we get it. Why don't you drink it blind and see what you like? And invariably people chose Pepsi and the market share rose. And that's what even Amrit had to do. A sort of a guerrilla marketing sort of a strategy, because that's the problem statement. How do you come into a space which has behemoths, which have huge marketing budgets? That's one of the things. They did multiple things all along the way, but
don't reveal it all. Let people read the book.
There you go.
Yeah, and the brand is actually built not just through marketing, but especially if you're in the retailing industry, you're built through your relationships, your customer experience in the store and all that. But speaking specifically of branding and marketing, I think one of the things Tanishq has done very well over the decades is to deeply understand its customers as people, more than customers, but as people, as women. And many women say that no jewelry brand gets us like Tanishq does. For example, whether it is, we had a second marriage film way back in 2013, when we sort of took a stand that it was perfectly fine for a woman, especially a woman, even a woman with a child, to have a second marriage. And in a way, sort of stood with that point of view. And over the years, and that was all in mainstream television before the social media time. I think the most important thing is whether it is in the social media time or otherwise, how deeply do you understand your customers as people? And what insights do you have about what they love, what are their anxieties, and how you actually create something, a bridge between the brand and the people through that deep understanding. And it'll work today on YouTube, it worked then on Doordarshan.
But patience seems to be an important part of both the stories, so to speak. Amrit took its time to build the brand. The Titan took its time to set up Tanishq. So in that sense, in the social media age wherein we are kind of hoping to instantly capitalize and go from 0 to 1 billion in 11 months, this kind of stands contrary to that kind of expectation.
I don't know. I think obviously because of the digital age, the speed with which you can build a business is much greater. It's not just the social media side. I think it's the digital age where people are buying online. So it took a long time to put up 500 stores, whereas or distribute into 10,000 outlets. But in an instant or in a few days, it's available all over the world. So that part is.
So in that sense, it can work to your advantage in many senses.
If your product is of that type, where people are willing to buy it online.
Yeah, right.
To add to this, but that's also going to come down to how you strategize, right? One of the key things that Amrit does is that it doesn't try to flood the market with its product. Okay, it's sold out for the next 5 years. Whatever they make, they're sold out for the next 5 years. Whether that's a good strategy or not, time will tell. You can't tell. But because of that, they're anyway capping what comes out. So they anyway needed some time to sort of, they don't need to worry about selling as much once the brand was built. But until then, they were struggling to sell. The moment they became the household name because of an award they got, they had the good problem. They had no product. Everywhere you see the complaint about Amrit is, we don't get enough of that stuff, right? So that's another strategy that they pursue. But in case of Tanishq, it's probably different. So I'm trying to contrast how even strategy would sort of come down to whether you're tech or not. How do you approach the business? What is the positioning? What is it that you want to do? Will also matter in that sense.
Right. We just have time for a few questions. I'd like to throw it open to the audience. I saw your hand first, so I'll go with you, and I'll come to you next.
This is a question for Venkataraman sir. One thing, maybe I haven't read the book, but Tanishq revolutionized the fact that you can actually check your gold, purity of your gold, That is what I found so fascinating, because if you go to a local jeweler, you have no idea what is the purity of gold, you're just trusting. So Tanish changed that paradigm for the Indian consumer. And I think anyone who discerns gold kind of, wants to get the genuine stuff and backed by the Tata name. So, can you?
Yeah, so there is this machine called the carat meter that we introduced in 1997, which actually measures the components of the metals in the gold alloy without melting it. And therefore, you can bring in, and even today, you can bring in your necklace. In 2 minutes, you'll know it's 18 karat, 19 karat, 22, 24, or whatever it is. And that was the breaking point in a sense.
Mr. Venkataraman, this is Indulekha. We've spoken before. So my first question was around the carat meter. That was one of your differentiators, right? Creating a gold brand that you could trust. Could you maybe tell the audience a little bit about how the company pivoted from just having the machine to check the purity to,
Sure.
Yeah.
So we were used to demonstrating the purity or impurity of the jewelry of customers without really offering a solution. Because the customers would get very disturbed saying that, look, you have told me that it is only 17 karat. Now what do I do next? You've just made me feel bad. And then in 2001 or 2002, we introduced something called the exchange program, where you come and you discover maybe it is 17 karat, you get a value for it, but Tanishq enables you to change it for 22 or 24 karat jewelry. And that became, from 2001, a huge program of customer acquisition. And even today, about 30% of our sales is through exchange. Thanks for that.
Mr. Venkataraman, for a jewelry head, I see that you're not wearing any jewelry yourself, nor wearing a watch. But my question is, you recently acquired Carrot Lane brand. I'm not a businessman, I know nothing about business, but I was wondering if you paid too much in the light of lab-grown diamonds.
Actually, this is a book reading event.
Right. We have time for one last question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the session. My question is to Mr. Venkataraman. In fact, both of you, what are your thoughts on content marketing in retail business today, especially for brands like Tanishq and Amrut, which have a lot of story to tell, as you guys just did?
Quite a lot, actually. Whether it is the deep design story sitting in a collection, or the kind of transformative work we do for the artisans who make our jewelry. We have transformed the lives of close to 20,000 artisans over the last 2.5 decades and brought significant improvements in their situation in terms of process, place, people practices, even the effluent treatment and stuff like that. So we have a lot of opportunity, and we do use a lot of content in multiple places, in the stores, online, everywhere we do that.
On that note, I would like to formally end this session. Thank you so much for your insights, your very, very limited insights to branding. And I mean, when I say limited, I don't mean that the content was limited. I mean to say I hope they have stirred your curiosity enough to buy the books. They are both excellent books. I would recommend as a publisher to buy the books, and the bookstore's right behind you. You can find their books very, very easily. So you have no excuses at all. So thank you so much, and thank you for being here.